everybody, I'm Jennifer Blevin-Smith with Integral Clinic Solutions, and you're watching my YouTube channel, Navigating the Business of Medicine. Today I want to talk about malpractice insurance or professional liability insurance. This is used interchangeably in the healthcare field, so if someone's talking about professional liability insurance, they're speaking about malpractice insurance. All medical providers need to be covered with some type of malpractice insurance plan. It is customary for the employer to pay the premiums for these plans, but there are also different things that are put into contracts regarding who will be responsible for paying for tail coverage if a provider is to get terminated with or without cause, as well as retirement or leaving their current employment, and all of those details. We're not going to talk about that today because, like I said, it's always an individual contract and every employer can be different, but just keep that in mind if you are going to employ other providers at your practice, that you will want to include those types of clauses and verbiage in those contracts with those providers. And I would definitely use an attorney to help you draft those contracts ahead of time. Let's jump right in to the different definitions you need to know about malpractice insurance. There's a very good chance that you have been employed or you're fresh out of school and maybe you don't know a ton about malpractice insurance and you just know the basics, and that's really good. But if you're going to be someone paying for the malpractice premiums, I would encourage you to do a little bit more research and find someone who would be able to guide you on this information a little further than what I'm going to talk about, just so you can make the best purchase and planning for your employees and also your business. The malpractice insurance is in addition to other liability insurance you may have for your business or the building if you own it, or even leasing it, that kind of stuff. So just keep in mind this is all about errors and omission of any kind of things that patients could be filing against any of your providers or yourself for negligence or purposefully hurting them in their opinion, or whatever the case could be. It's usually errors and omissions. There's definitely different policies that you can get called like legal malpractice insurance that would help you cover legal fees and that kind of stuff, but we're not going to talk about that today. Today we're just going to talk about strictly malpractice liability insurance. There are 5 main things that affect the cost of premiums when it comes to purchasing malpractice insurance. The first one is your location. Geographically, everywhere is different, especially state by state, because there's different requirements of what the minimum amounts are for claims and aggregates. And we'll get into that a little bit further, but just know that you would want to check with the state in which you're practicing, if you don't know already, what their minimum requirements are for coverage for the malpractice. The second thing is going to be your specialty. Some specialties have way more risk involved, such as, specialized surgeons and OBGYN, and then you have kind of the lesser risk category specialties, probably, I don't know, I'm just guessing, dermatology, podiatry, stuff like that. I could be wrong, but just know that your specialty definitely affects your premium and how much you want to be covered as well under your policy. The third thing is your claims history. So every individual provider's claim history. Most times when you're applying for malpractice insurance, you have to supply them with at least the last 6 to 10 years of claims history. So many times if you've worked for another employer or entity, you have to reach out to whichever department is responsible for that, and they give you some kind of letter explaining that you had no claims made during your employment of specific date of start to date of ending and whenever that policy ended. So just make sure that you have access to that, because you are going to be asked to provide that for each provider you're trying to get covered. The next thing is carrier competition. And just like in the auto insurance world or the healthcare insurance world, there's going to be some more competitive rates in areas maybe where there are more malpractice insurance carriers. So you definitely want to make sure that you're shopping around in your location, especially if kind of the market is flooded with a lot of options, because they might try to outbid one another or have better policy plans and coverage and premiums compared to their competitors because they want the business. The last thing is hours worked. Full-time employees or full-time providers that work at least 20 hours or more a week are usually going to pay a higher premium than people who are considered part-time, and that's usually under 20 hours per week. Now, every insurer has to determine how many hours they're going to be working on average when they apply for the insurance. So you need to know ahead of time if your providers are going to be part-time equivalents or full-time equivalents, and you have to know how the actual insurance company defines the part-time and full-time. I'm generalizing with the over 20 and under 20, but every policy could be different, so that's definitely something you want to know about when you're shopping around. Hopefully you get in touch with some really good representatives at each company that can ask you the right questions and help you get set up on the things that are going to be best for your practice and your clinic and your business, so that you're not overly insured, but you have enough insurance and you're doing it correctly for your specialty, your location, and your business. They're going to ask you if you want to have a claims-made policy or an occurrence policy. Now, I'm not a specialist in this by any means, and honestly, I've never shopped around for malpractice insurance for anyone I had worked for until recently. I just kind of helped make sure the premiums were paid, and I would renew any paperwork that was sent to us. But until recently, I had never had to shop around and kind of get better at all of the nomenclature in the malpractice insurance world. So I had to look up and actually understand what claims made versus occurrence was. Claims made is where you have to be paying for the actual insurance coverage and be covered by that plan when an incident is filed against you. An occurrence means that you can be covered for something filed even if your policy was expired or canceled. So for example, if you were only covered from January of 2021 to December of 2021, and someone filed an occurrence for something that happened during that time, but they didn't file it until February of 2022, then if you have an occurrence plan, then you paid, I guess, essentially a little extra so that it would cover you even though you're not currently covered by that plan. But because it was filed during the time that you were covered by that plan, it will cover you. Where the claims made will only cover you if it is filed during the time period in which you're actually covered. So my example of January 2021 to December 2021, and somebody files it in February of 2022 and you're no longer covered, it would not cover you. Usually, like I said, people who have an occurrence plan pay extra on their premiums because it gives you kind of that extra coverage. But in my experience, most doctors in the specialties that I've worked for have the claims made policies, and I think it's because of the specialties in which I have worked. But that is definitely something you need to decide what you want, and if you want to shop around for both prices of premiums, that's your choice, but definitely know that those are the two options they're most likely going to give you. The other thing is they're going to want to know if you want tail coverage, and this will go into your contracts that you'll create for your providers that you hire. And tail coverage is mainly going to cover those situations where you no longer have the coverage plan active, but somebody files for something. So usually people who have the claims made policies, when they leave somewhere or retire or whatever, they have tail coverage so that then it does cover if someone files something after you've been there during your time of employment. So usually you have an occurrence plan or you have a claims made, and then you choose to have a tail coverage when you leave to make up for anything that is filed after you leave and no longer have an active plan. I know this can be a little confusing, especially with my words, but I'm hoping that I'm making a little bit of sense to you. And the tail coverage, the costs and everything like that, like I said, that all comes down to the nitty-gritty stuff in the contract of who should be responsible for paying for that. Also, when you're applying for malpractice insurance, and let's say you used to be at an old carrier and you're moving to a new carrier, they will ask you if you have previous tail coverage purchased with your last company, just to make sure they know where their risk is going to be when they're covering you and what kind of policy you're going to need. They're also going to ask you a lot of things and have you fill out a questionnaire of different procedures you do in your office and different equipment you have in your office, because that's going to also determine what kind of coverage you need, what kind of writers you might need to have on your policy, or if you need to pay extra for something depending on if you have an x-ray machine or if you do certain procedures with, generalized or local anesthetics, that kind of thing. So be prepared to answer a lot of questions, and it's not because they're being nosy. They just want to make sure that, one, they're not putting themselves at a higher risk for coverage, and two, that you're going to be covered appropriately for things that you perform in your office and for your patients. There is an option to do shared limits, so you also will need to decide if you want a group policy or if you want every individual provider to have their own policy, or both. So you could have a group policy and then decide you want every doctor to have their own individual policy underneath that umbrella of the group policy, but then decide that maybe your PAs and MPs don't necessarily need their own individual policies, but they do need to have something, so you decide to do a shared limits, and that's a shared limits with your group policy. So let's say now we're going to start talking about your limits, and you have a very common limit, and the minimum in Oregon is a 1.3. So if someone says they have a 1.3 limit, it means it's $1 million limit per claim, and it's a $3 million limit aggregate for the policy year, which means that the insurance will not pay more than $3 million total for any claims made during a policy year. Anything that exceeds that $3 million will be the policyholder's responsibility. The $1 million claim is $1 million per claim filed during the policy year, and anything extending outside of the $1 million is also the policyholder's responsibility. So that means that if you have a shared limit with certain mid-levels, you're going to share those limits with the nurse practitioner and the physician assistant, or both nurse practitioners or both physician assistants. Also make sure that you're following your local laws, and if your PAs and MPs need to have their own individual plans, then you will have to do so, and your broker should be able to help you with that, but these are just some examples that I'm giving you. If you're going to be doing clinical research, you probably will need to check with your contracts and your requirements for each study, because they will tell you what the requirement is for your malpractice. And sometimes it can be a $3 million limit for a claim, $5 million aggregate limit, and you want to make sure you're in compliance with that. So make sure you look at those as you're reviewing the studies and what the requirements are for your site. I would also definitely make sure that you let your malpractice insurance company know that you're going to be performing clinical research trials in your business, because there might be an extra rider or some other information that needs to be on your coverage plan, and you don't want it to go to underwriting without that information, or if you add it on afterwards, you need to notify your representative so that they can change that. I think I covered all the basics. We have your limits, your shared policies, your individual policies, occurrence versus claims made, and you just have to remember this is all for errors and omissions. There's other things that can cover, like I said, the legal malpractice side of things, but this is something you want to shop around for. Give yourself plenty of time to make sure that you can find the best deal for you. And also another thing that a lot of people don't realize, especially if it's a brand new policy and everyone has a claims history and stuff, usually they start off the premiums kind of low, and then over the next 5 years they get more and more because you have more risk, right? Because you've seen more patients, you've provided more services, and so you have to increase your premiums over those 5 years because you just add more risk to the chances of maybe having something filed against you or your other providers or your business. So just be aware of that and anticipate that in your budget. And also realize that most places let you do different options and payments for your premiums. The most easy one that people I know choose is the quarterly installment payments. So you just pay it once quarterly, the total amount of the premium, and then the next quarter and the next quarter. It's easier to track, and sometimes you still get a little bit of a discount for paying a larger chunk. But that's something you would want to ask your broker about too, what gives you the best incentive if you get certain discounts for paying more at once, and if you get any benefit for breaking it down or no penalty, that kind of stuff. If you have any suggestions or information that your colleagues should know about finding out and researching malpractice policies, please leave that in the comments. It's always good to hear from other people who've actually done this and have experience in this. And if you have any questions for me, leave those in the comments as well. If you feel like this content was helpful, smash the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet, because we'll have a lot of different content about the business of medicine, and this is one important detail. Thank you so much. I hope you guys had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we'll see you soon.